A huge leak of confidential documents reveals how the rich and powerful use tax havens to hide their wealth. Reports indicate that 11 million documents have been leaked from Panama-based law firm Moscow Fonseca, a company that has been allegedly helping clients launder money, dodge sanctions, and evade tax.
Follow the money. And this morning it leads to how some of the world's rich and powerful are hiding their wealth. The largest ever document leak is giving us an unprecedented look inside offshore tax havens.
There is no doubt that the problem of global tax avoidance generally is a huge problem. It's been brought up in G7 meetings. It's been brought up in G20 meetings. There has been some progress made in coordinating between tax authorities in different countries so that we can make sure that we're catching some of the most egregious examples. One of the big problems that we have that a lot of this stuff is legal, not illegal. And unless the United States and other countries lead by example in closing some of these loopholes and provisions, then in many cases you can trace what's taking place, but you can't stop it.
Well, unless you've been living underneath a rock for the last week, you have heard about the Panama Papers. The Panama Papers, a massive leak of 11.5 million confidential documents spanning 40 years and are about 100 times larger than the WikiLeaks and the Swiss leaks and the Lux leaks. We go back and take a look at some of the different leaks that have occurred. This is massive, and it's shining a bright light on a parallel universe where the ultra-rich and ultra-powerful use offshore shell companies to dodge taxes. According to the story, an anonymous source contacted a German newspaper, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and released and provided a tremendous amount of data about the Panamanian law firm Moscow Fonseca. The German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung found that it was completely unable to handle and process 11.5 million confidential documents, and so they turned to the ICIJ, which is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists that we'll talk about in a moment. But they handed all of this information over to the ICIJ, and for the past year now, I guess this happened about a year ago, over 300 global journalists have been investigating what is now known as the Panama Papers. The documents are filled with information about how the ultra-rich and the ultra-powerful, including political leaders and corporate titans, but not just them, drug dealers and arms traffickers, sex traffickers, and people who are just in general violation of the law or want to hide their money, are setting up shell companies through this Panamanian law firm, Moscow Fonseca. There's just been a barrage of news about all of this, and as I was going through the information, because when I saw the Panama Papers, I thought to myself, good night. If there is a follow the money story, is it not the Panama Papers, right? This made total sense for us to cover on this week's broadcast. But as I began to dig deeper into it, and as I began to look at what the accusations were and the allegations, and as I began to look at the ICIJ, and as I began to look at the overall story, I began to smell propaganda. It became obvious that this story was playing far too well into the hands of Washington for my taste, and so I dug deeper. Before I get into that, let's just talk real quickly about what this even is. What the heck is a shell company? Well, in essence, a shell company, which is what these ultra-rich and ultra-powerful people have been doing for a long time, setting up shell companies in offshore tax havens. In essence, a shell company is a fake company. It has no physical presence, it has no employees, and it produces nothing. Anonymous shell companies not only allow the mega wealthy to hide money in order to lower their tax liability, they also serve to shelter illicit activities of arms dealers, drug lords, and terror groups. And get this, there is actually one address in the Cayman Islands, according to these Panama Papers, that has over 18,000 businesses registered to it. One address with 18,000 businesses registered to that one single address. Whether you've ever been aware of it before or not, the elites or society's upper crust have long sought clever tax avoidance strategies in order to lower their overall tax liability. In recent centuries, Switzerland offered one of the most secure and secretive banking systems available on Earth to an exclusive group with extraordinary levels of contract security and physical vault security. In fact, they still do in many ways. Although you may remember back in February of 2015, there was another big leak. In fact, the biggest leak in banking history up to that point, involving global banking giant HSBC. Secret documents from HSBC's Swiss banking arm back in February of 2015 leaked to the French government by a former employee turned whistleblower revealed that the bank helped thousands of its elite clients dodge taxes by hiding money in secret accounts. Among HSBC's clients, corporate titans, political leaders, and also arms traffickers, terror groups, and drug lords. So what's this all about? Well, in recent years, there has been growing pressure on financial institutions to automatically surrender information on customer assets to overseas tax authorities. Similar to the FATCA bill that was passed, or the FATCA, what's known as the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. It basically requires financial firms around the world to disclose details of the assets on all U.S. citizens held overseas. And if they don't provide that, if these foreign financial institutions do not provide that, they face punishing taxes on their U.S. operations. Now, in the wake of the release of these Panama Papers, you have seen President Barack Obama out in the limelight pushing a brand new international tax reform. And I say brand new, it's actually been the OEC's agenda now for some time to rein in the approximately $20 to $30 trillion that are currently stashed away in tax havens. That's according to the Tax Justice Network. We're talking about $20 to $30 trillion of global wealth that is missing from the world economy thanks to these tax havens. And so what really this is about, in our estimation, are a couple of things. First of all, global taxation. Friends, you know we're en route to a global economy. I've told you this over and over again. We're going to have a global currency. We're going to have a global government. We're going to have a global central bank. We're going to have a global taxation regime. But it all has to begin there. You see, you have to begin tying things together slowly but surely. This is exactly what the EU is, the European Union. Many people say it's going to go away. We talked about this last week on the show with Jim Rickards when he was here. You know, you've heard this from many different sources. People say the European Union is going to collapse, the euro is going to go away. Of course, it's a bad idea. Of course, they've done poorly in the euro zone. Their goal wasn't to have a stellar, debt-free economy. Their goal was to prevent war from breaking out on the continent. Europe has been one of the bloodiest continents going back throughout all of time. We always hear about the Muslims and how crazy they are, and how we hear about how crazy the Middle East is. You want to talk about crazy? You go back and look at Europe for the last 2,000 years. That's crazy, right? That is crazy. So Europe, they have to have some sort of incentive to keep their finger off of the trigger and to keep their hands off of each other's throat. Throughout time, France and Germany and Britain, all of these different countries in Europe have been at each other's throat. The EU and the Eurozone and the Euro help to create some sense of sanity, and it provides a semblance of peace in the area. You have to have economic peace if you want to have freedom from war in that part of the world. But nevertheless, these revelations from the Panama Papers show us that we are now on the cusp of a global taxation regime where countries provide data back and forth between their respective tax authorities, and so they can share information on various individuals, no matter where they're from, they can share that information. And that's what the G7 and the G20 have been pushing now for some time. And one of the easiest ways to fix this would be to create a global register of corporations with universal rules. So the real name of the real owner has to be at the very top of the paper. It's a very simple thing. In fact, setting up a corporation is so simple that I have a little clip here from our friends over at Fusion that shows just how simple it really is to set up a shell company for, maybe your cat. Let's roll the tape.
Hello.
Natasha?
Hi, how are you?
I'm Nancy Wolf. Pleased to meet you. And this is Advantage Delaware. This is my husband, Steve Wolf.
Oh. Hey, Steve, how are you? I'm Natasha Del Toro. I've never done this before. I'd like to set up this company for my cat. I have a cat named Suki. Actually, I have a photo of her right here. You mind to That's,
She's adorable.
isn't she cute?
Yes.
So the company I'd like to set up is called She Sells Seashells, LLC.
A very catchy name.
Let me hear you say it.
She Sells Seashells, LLC. Didn't know there'd be a test.
No, I did not.
What am I going to need then to set up this company?
Actually, it's pretty easy. You don't need any documents. You pay for our service, and we go ahead and form the entity.
I don't need to show you my license or my passport or even my cat's, but you know.
Well, the picture was lovely. We enjoyed it.
So I'm just writing my name, address,
Okay, that's good.
cell phone, and didn't have to show my license. Do you have
This is
to-
good. $249 it is.
I'm going to use Amex.
Amex is great.
Express?
Okay, let's do this.
Let's do this. I put my name on the legal pad, address, phone number, made the payment, and she just did the certificate of formation and signed it. So this is it. So this is all I needed to form my business entity. And my name's not on there, but your name's on there.
My name's on there, yes.
Cool. So this is my business. I just created a business called She Sells Seashells, LLC. And it took like 5 minutes.
So that's simple. Just set up a shell company for your cat, and you don't even need a picture of your cat. You don't need a ID. You don't need anything at all to set up a company. So here's just an example of some of the obvious problems with the system. Now, I want to say this also, that there are very legitimate uses for offshore companies. There are very legitimate uses for offshore foundations and trusts. So don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that offshore companies and shell corporations serve no good or legitimate purpose. Instead, the question is you have to ask who really desires anonymity, right? Who really desires anonymity? And of course, those who desire to be anonymous are those who are operating illegally. And also, think about this, also those who make the laws, right? If you make the laws, if you're a lawmaker or a policymaker, and then you can hide your financial activity in a shell company where no one can see what you're doing, then you can invest around the laws that you're creating. And so among the revelations contained in the Panama Papers, we see financial dealings of Vladimir Putin, right, of Russia, one of the State Department's top enemies, Pakistan's Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif. We also have the former Vice President of Iraq, Alawi. We also have the President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and the Prime Minister of Iceland, who was the very first high-profile head of state to actually lose his job. Actually, he resigned over the allegations in the Panama Papers. But this is all where it started to get murky for me as I was researching this over the weekend. As I was looking at the Panama Papers, I started noticing that Putin, and in particular Beijing, China's head of state Xi Jinping, and his family in particular, were in the crosshairs of these Panama Papers. The more I looked into these allegations, the more that I realized that Washington is starting to look like the primary beneficiary of this sudden release of the Panama Papers. And number one, it comes from an anonymous source. This is the very first thing that really caught my eye, was the fact that in the past, you've had people like Edward Snowden, who comes out and provides information. You have a face, you have obviously a name, and he is saying, this is what I have. You also have the same thing with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. You have a masthead or a face behind these leaks. But in the case of the Panama Papers, this comes from an anonymous source. The person who provided the information is unknown. So first of all, that provides a little bit of suspicion. Secondly, the main targets of the Panama Papers are political, and they target heads of state in Beijing and in Moscow. That seems very bizarre, doesn't it? Thirdly, there has been little to no reporting at all whatsoever of U.S. involvement. Now, we're supposedly going to learn the specifics of the 3,000 plus U.S. companies, the 400 plus U.S. individuals who are talked about in the Panama Papers, but we're not going to learn about them till later. Later. Why the wait? Why are we waiting for the U.S. involvement in the Panama Papers? And so I started digging a little deeper, and I paid closer attention to the ICIJ. This is the network of journalists who are handling the Panama Papers. They're the ones who are entrusted with them, and they are not releasing them to the public. Instead, they are simply saying, trust us, we'll go through them. And according to them, the reason why they have not gotten to the U.S. individuals and the U.S. corporations who have been involved in all of this offshore tax haven shenanigan is that, gosh, there's 11.5 million documents. And how are we supposed to get through all of those? We'll eventually get to the ones in the U.S. But interestingly enough, they were quick to find the ones on Putin in Russia and on Jinping in Beijing, right? They were very quick to release those and to publicly humiliate and shame State Department enemies. But there's been very little released about U.S. involvement. So as I dug into the ICIJ, I started thinking to myself, I'm not too familiar with this group. I've heard them do some other things as well. They're basically a huge international network of various media outlets from different countries who collaborate together to provide more powerful reporting. And as I went to see, well, who's financing these guys? Who actually pays for the ICIJ? Who's backing them? And when you go to ICIJ.org and you go to the About Us section, you'll quickly discover who is actually financing the ICIJ. And would you know it or not, it includes wonderful little outfits like the Open Society Foundation. That sound familiar? Run by George Soros. Also supported by the Ford Foundation and the Waterloo Foundation. So many of these foundations or trusts who are propping up the ICIJ and financing its work include guys like George Soros. So you begin to wonder, what exactly is this story about the Panama Papers and what is it driving at? And if this really is some sort of warfare, have we entered into a new era where anonymous leaks with allegations about our enemies are the next level of war games? That's what I'm suggesting, friends. If you take a look at what happened in China, China was true to form by enforcing an immediate media blackout. They censored social media posts and news stories. Any web page that contained the phrase Panama Papers has now been purged from all social media posts, all web pages in Chinese. This according to a government directive released by Beijing. The order was sent out to media outlets, and here is the quote. This is from the Province Internet Information Office. Quote, find and delete reprinted reports on the Panama Papers. Do not follow up on related content. No exceptions. If material from foreign media attacking China is found on any website, it will be dealt with severely. Okay, please act immediately. This was released by the Province Internet Information Office in Beijing on April the 4th. Now, with China basically saying this is propaganda and we're not going to allow our people to see it, you have to ask yourself, what really is going on here? What really is going on? What are the Panama Papers? What exactly are they trying to achieve? And who released this information? If you listen to WikiLeaks, they have come out and stated that the entire batch of 11.5 documents should be made publicly available. Of course, the ICIJ says, no, let us go through them. We'll tell you what's inside of them. Just trust us, right? Just trust us. We'll tell you. And so far, they've told us about all of the State Department's enemies, right? Now, there's been a few Western characters that have been involved. Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain. But of course, if you listen to any reporting about it, they're immediately getting him off the hook, saying, oh, no, but there's been no allegation of any kind of wrongdoing with Mr. Cameron. There's been very, very little coming out about that story. However, with Putin and with Jinping, there's been no kind of letting them off of the hook at all in the media. In fact, it's been assumed that they are somehow tied to this corruption. There's at least three other funny things about this, too. The first one being that we're beginning to hear that the IRS headquarters, the basement, caught on fire in Washington, D.C. just a couple of days ago, just as the Panama Papers were being released. And now we're being told that the IRS headquarters, this according to the AP this week, is going to stay closed all week after the basement fire. They have closed the entire IRS headquarters in Washington, D.C. for the entire week to deal with a basement fire. Okay, so this is very interesting. Could be true. It could be very, completely all legit. But nevertheless, how bizarre, right? Just as they're dealing with all of this kind of mayhem, and as the U.S. information has still not come out yet on all of these different characters. Secondly, Obama was immediately out in the press calling for an international tax reform. This comes, by the way, just as the IRS received power to revoke passports based upon tax delinquencies. So the IRS just enforced power to revoke passports. They just got that signed into law. They now have that power. So if you have not paid your taxes, or if they believe that you owe more than $50,000 in delinquent tax debt, then they can withhold or revoke your passport. And that is a brand new law. And there was also, and I'm going to put a link to this in today's show notes, but there was a very interesting article that was put out in January of 2016 by Bloomberg Business Week. It was written by a guy by the name of Jesse Drucker. The name of the story is entitled, "The World's Favorite New Tax Haven is the United States. Moving money out of the usual offshore secrecy havens and into the U.S. is a brisk new business." And you would think I'm making this up, but I am not. I'll read you the very first couple of sentences of this article. Last September, at a law firm overlooking San Francisco Bay, Andrew Penny, a managing director at Rothschild & Company, gave a talk on how the world's wealthy elite can avoid paying taxes. His message is clear. You can help your clients move their fortunes to the United States, free of taxes and hidden from their governments. Some are calling the United States the new Switzerland. The story goes on. Everyone from London lawyers to Swiss trust companies is getting in on the act, helping the world's rich move accounts from places like the Bahamas and the British Virgin Islands to Nevada, Wyoming, and South Dakota. Wyoming, Nevada, and South Dakota. Rothschild, the centuries-old European financial institution, has opened a trust company in Reno, Nevada, a few blocks away from Harrah's and El Dorado casinos, and it is now moving the fortunes of wealthy foreign clients out of offshore tax havens such as Bermuda, subject to the new international disclosure requirements, and into Rothschild-run trusts in Nevada, which are exempt. So what a great way to grow your business, no? Especially as we are now hearing in 2016 that Reno, Nevada, becoming the biggest little tax haven in the world, and you have Wyoming and you have South Dakota, which are very friendly to tax evaders, thanks to the fact that the United States refuses to sign on to international financial regulations and requirements and reporting and all of this. And so now what we have is what appears to be Washington benefiting from the Panama Papers, but not just Washington. The Rothschilds are also benefiting, because now what the Panama Papers have done is they've taken a very big flashlight and they have shined it on this huge amount of money that exists in these offshore tax havens. And they've named names, right? And so what do you think you're going to do if you have a whole bunch, say you got $1 billion sitting in the Virgin Islands, and now, thanks to the Panama Papers, everybody knows that you have $1 billion sitting in the Virgin Islands. Now, what are you going to do if you're in that situation? Bless your heart, you have $1 billion in the Virgin Islands, and everybody knows about it. You going to leave it there? I think not. In fact, you might look to move it, huh? So right now there's a tremendous amount, no doubt, of money in motion and going where? Where's it going? The biggest little tax haven in the world, Reno, Nevada, thanks to the Rothschilds and their new banking setup that they have set up in Nevada to help people evade taxes. Do you understand what we're saying here? This is absolutely one of the most corrupt stories about black money that I can recall seeing. And Washington is the beneficiary, and Washington also happens to be allowing the tax havens to grow in these areas, Nevada, Wyoming, and South Dakota. So in a strange way, the U.S. has taken the moral high ground here by apparently preventing the names of U.S. individuals and corporations from coming out too early. That way, all of the humiliation, all of the shame goes on those initial names, right? So the prime minister of Poland pays the price. He loses his job. And also the folks running Beijing and the guy running Moscow, Mr. Putin, is under pressure, right? Let's let that simmer for a while, and then we'll finally get to those U.S. names, and we'll roll those out later on after all of the anger and all of the outrage has subsided, and now America is suddenly focused upon maybe something that, I don't know, Miley Cyrus said or that somebody else said, right? Once you've totally got the news cycle away from this, then we'll release the U.S. names, then we'll release the U.S. corporations' names. That's when we'll do that. Well, you can see that this looks like what it is, I think. And that is an absolute massive, massive war game. I think that's what we're seeing here. I really do. Now, before we close this segment, I have to share something with you. About a week or two ago, I was reminded, thanks to a link on the internet, I was reminded about an amazing interview I saw about a year ago with an individual who was a German reporter. He was one of the top mainstream reporters in Germany, and he spills the beans in this interview and tells the interviewer that he, as a German reporter, had been bribed by the CIA through different types of foundations and trusts who come in under the guise of wanting to help the Germans in their reporting and to provide them with great sources. But in reality, what it is it's the CIA. So this individual, this German reporter, is now going to tell you that he was bribed by the CIA to make the U.S. and Europe look good and to make Russia look bad. This is an amazing audio clip. It's going to run for maybe 10 minutes. I strongly urge you to listen to what is going to be said and to put this in context with what you are hearing now about the Panama Papers, the ICIJ, who is funded by Soros, who is funded by the Ford Foundation. Many of these foundations and trusts, which we know are connected in many ways to America's intelligence agency. And no doubt what you're going to hear here has something to do with what we're seeing in the Panama Papers. Let's roll the tape.
I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I was educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. But seeing right now, within the last months, how the German and American media tries to bring war to the people in Europe, to bring war to Russia. This is a point of no return. And I'm going to stand up and say it is not right what I have done in the past, to manipulate people, to make propaganda against Russia. And it is not right what my colleagues do and have done in the past, because they are bribed to betray the people, not only in Germany, all over Europe. I am very fearful of a new war in Europe, and I don't like to have this situation again, because war is never coming from itself. There is always people behind it to push for war. And this is not only politicians, this is journalists too. And we have betrayed in the past our readers just to push for war. And I don't want this anymore. I'm fed up with this propaganda. We live in a banana republic and not in a democratic country where we have press freedom, where we have human rights. If you see the German media, especially my colleagues who day by day write against the Russians, who are in transatlantic organizations and who are supported by the United States to do so, well, people like me, I became an honorary citizen of the state of Oklahoma in the United States. Just why? Just because I write pro-American. I wrote pro-American. I was supported by the Central Intelligence Agency, by the CIA. Why? Because I should be pro-American. I'm fed up with it. I don't want to do it anymore. And so I've just written a book not to earn money. No, it will cause a lot of trouble for me. Just to give the people in this country, in Germany, in Europe, and all over the world, a glimpse of a view what goes up behind the closed doors. If you go to your archives, you will find in March 1988 in Iraq, the Kurdish people have been gassed with poisoned gas. That is known all over the world. But in July 1988, they sent me to a town called Zubeidat on the Iraqi-Iranian border. It was war between the Iranians and the Iraqis, and I was sent there to photograph how the Iranians have been gassed with poisoned gas, with German poisoned gas. You call it Lost and Zarine, mustard gas, made by Germany. They have been gassed, and I was there to make photographs how these people have been killed by poisoned gas from Germany. When I came back to Germany, there was just one small photo in a newspaper, in the Frankfurter Allgemeine, and there was one small article not writing how impressive, brutally, how unhuman, how terrible it was to kill decades after the end of the Second World War people with German poisoned gas. So this was a situation I feel misused for having been there and just to give a documentary what has been done, but not being allowed to cry out to the world what we have done behind closed doors. Up to today, it's not well known in the public that with German public gas, there have been hundreds or thousands of people gassed in this city of Zubeidat. Now, you ask, what have I done for intelligence agencies? So, please see, most of the journalists you see in foreign countries, they claim to be journalists, and they might be journalists, European or American journalists, but many of them, like me in the past, are so-called non-official cover. That's what the Americans call that. I have been a non-official cover. Non-official cover means what? It means you too work for an intelligence agency. You help them if they want you to help them, but when they find out that you are not only a journalist but a spy too, they will never say, oh, this was one of our guys. They will not know you. That means non-official cover. So I have helped them in several situations, and I feel ashamed for that too now. Like I feel ashamed that I have worked for very recommended newspaper like the Frankfurter Allgemeine because I was bribed by billionaires, I was bribed by the Americans not to report exactly the truth, but I just imagined in my car while I was driving to this interview, I just tried to work out in my brain what would have happened if I would have written a pro-Russian article in the Frankfurter Allgemeine. Well, I don't know what would have happened, but we were all educated to write pro-European, pro-American, but please, not pro-Russian. So I'm very sorry for that, but this is not what I understand for democracy and for press freedom. I'm very sorry for that. Germany is still a kind of a colony of the United States. You see that in many points, like the majority of the Germans don't want to have nukes in our country, but we still have American nukes. So we are still a kind of a colony of the Americans. And being a colony, it is very easy to approach young journalists through what is very important here is transatlantic organizations. All journalists from really respected and recommended big German newspapers, magazines, radio stations, TV stations, they are all members or guests of those big transatlantic organizations. In these transatlantic organizations, you are approached to be pro-American, and there is nobody coming to you and saying, well, we are the Central Intelligence Agency, would you like to work for us? No, this is not the case how it happens. What they do, these transatlantic organizations, is they invite you for seeing the United States. They pay for that, they pay all your expenses and everything. So you're bribed, you get more and more corrupt because they make you good contacts. You won't know that those good contacts are, let's say, non-official covers or officially people working for Central Intelligence Agency or other American agencies. So you make friends. You think they are friends and you cooperate with them. But they ask you, well, could you do me this favor? Could you do me that favor? And so your brain more and more is brainwashed through these guys. And your question was, is this only the case with German journalists? No, I think it is especially the case with British journalists, because they have a much closer relationship. It is especially the case with Israelis, of course, with French journalists. It is the case for Australian journalists, for journalists from New Zealand, from Taiwan, there is many countries in the Arab world, like Jordan, for example, like Oman, the Sultanate of Oman. There is many countries where this happens, where you find people to claim they are respected journalists, but if you look behind them, you'll find they are puppets on a string of the Central Intelligence Agency. I'll give you one example. Sometimes the intelligence agencies, they come to your office and want you to write an article. I give you an example not from strange other journalists, from me myself. I just remember that the German Foreign Intelligence, Bundesnachrichtendienst, it is just a sister organization of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was founded by the American Intelligence Agency. So one day, the BND, this German Foreign Intelligence Agency, came to my office at the Frankfurter Allgemeine in Frankfurt. And they wanted me to write an article about Libya and about Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. I had absolutely no secret informations regarding Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and Libya, but they gave me all these secret informations, and they just wanted me to sign the article with my name. I did that, but it was an article that was published in the Frankfurter Allgemeine that originally came from the Bundesnachrichtendienst, from the German Foreign Intelligence Agency. So do you really think that this is journalism? Intelligence agencies writing articles? It was a story that was printed worldwide 2 days later. But I had no information on that. It was the intelligence agency that wanted me to write this article. But this is not the way journalism should work, that intelligence agencies, that they decide what is printed and what not. If I say no, I give you an example, a very good example if you say no. Well, we have a rescue unit in Germany with helicopters for traffic accidents. They call themselves the Yellow Angels. There was one guy who didn't want to cooperate. He was a pilot of the helicopter service of the Yellow Angels in Germany. This guy said no to the Foreign Intelligence Service, Bundesnachrichtendienst, when they approached him and wanted him as a non-official cover to work for the German Foreign Intelligence Agency, just to pretend to be somebody from the Yellow Angels. So what happened was that he lost his job. And the court in Germany, the judge, decided that they were right because such a guy could not be trusted. He was kicked off his job because he didn't cooperate with the Foreign Intelligence Service. So I knew what would happen if I would not cooperate with intelligence services. I have had, 6 times my house was house searched because I was accused by the German public prosecutor. I was accused of leaking secrets of states. 6 times house searched. They hoped that I wouldn't do that ever again. But I think it's worse that the truth will come out one day. The truth won't die. And I don't mind what will happen. I've had 3 heart attacks. I have no children, so if they want to bring me to court or to prison, so it's worse for the truth.